blah, blah, blah.
Dog catcher,
Dog
He can do that too.
ACO, animal control.
That's right. The more prone to failure.
Speaking of animal control officers, we are.
Okay. Welcome back. House Ways and Means. We're gonna continue on H 454. But
Yeah, so ladies and gents, we did have an opportunity to find Tammy Colby in an airport. And she can join us for 30 minutes. And help answer any questions we might have about the foundation formula before we get on with the rest of our stuff. Recognizing we have a lot of things to go through in the rest of the afternoon, so many decisions to make. So anyway, so it's great that we could find her as she's in between gates. We're waiting for her to come in. Yeah. So if you have questions and you're thinking about them, if you might write them down so we can have a focused conversation with her instead of having her try to go over the entire concept of the foundation fund. We've all been there before. Yeah.
This is what I told him.
there she is.
So,
Momento, por favor.
This is when we need Jim Harrison to tell a joke. He used to tell jokes.
Howard Jackson.
Good afternoon.
Howard Jackson, please come see the count.
right, perfect. Dr. Colby, thank you for joining us in, on short notice and as you're traveling. So hopefully you're enjoying good airport food.
I'm just trying to get home. I was supposed to get home on Wednesday and the flights were all canceled, so.
No. Glamorous travel. We were diving into the foundation formula. Some questions came up.
Destination free of charge.
Oh, just hoping you might be able to answer some of the questions. So I was, there we go.
Dr. Burkhardt has a question.
Dr. Colby, you had talked about how your analysis was based on comparing outcomes to spending. So there was some kind of regression analysis. What outcomes data was used in the analysis?
Academic achievement outcomes in reading and math for tested grade levels.
So all grade levels?
All grade levels, yes.
Okay. So then if we look at I'm sorry, I should have asked if I could have a follow-up.
You got it.
Yeah, so my question is, if we see regions, because there are 3 regions that show a decrease if we were to apply the base and the weights in terms of their funding from where
I'm sorry, decrease in what?
their funding. So if we compare 2025 funding, if we aggregate, and granted, these are sort of districts that are made up at the moment, right? But they're bigger regions than just saying a specific school district in a specific town or group of towns, but it's sort of slightly broader regions. So if we look at 3 out of the regions that Julia so helpfully kind of aggregated for us, their FY25 spending, ed spending payments, in comparison to their educational opportunity payment, if we apply the proposed base and the proposed weights, their spending, their ed payment would go down. So the educational opportunity payment would be lower than their FY 25 education payment under the current system. So I guess my question is my understanding correct that that means your analysis is showing that those regions are spending more than they need to achieve the outcomes that we are hoping?
Yes. Yes.
And then can I ask a question about where the bar was set in terms of what outcomes we are hoping for in terms of student achievement? So you said that
My understanding is that the bar is set at state proficiency levels, and so I can confirm. I can talk to Bruce to get exact. If you want the exact level, I can get that for you, but I can't answer that question right now. So that's something I could get back to you in writing, Representative Burkhardt, if that's okay.
That would be helpful. Yeah.
Yep.
Any information, that's my broad question before we had a chance to talk to you, was if we could just see more of how the sausage was made, basically,
Well,
what
all the
inputs
details
were.
on the sausage are in the 2019 report. We did not change any of the models, right? All we did was add data to the models.
So the 2019 report, so I'll provide a link to that.
Yeah, for the 2019 pupil weighting study. We didn't, right? Like, we added data to our existing models. That's all, right? And so all the methodological data is in the back of that report.
Okay. I'll review that offline.
The other thing you might want to look at, Representative Burkhardt, is there is a footnote in the memo that references a recent paper that Bruce wrote for the Annenberg, which is actually coming out in a peer-reviewed publication shortly. And that provides a step-by-step for how the education cost function works. So I think if you're trying to get your head around sort of like how does the math work and sort of how does this work, that would actually be my recommendation, is to start there, because that provides really specific detail about the steps and the processes and sort of how it all works. And it is in there. It's in a footnote right now. I can also, if there's also a policy brief, I didn't include a link to that, but I can, to that we wrote for the state of New Hampshire when we did this for them. So if you'd like, I can also get you some additional reading material for how the method works.
That would be really helpful. I would appreciate that. And I guess, I don't even know if this is a question for you necessarily, but it's just an observation of mine. I'm struggling to marry the intuition with the data, right? Because the intuition in districts across the state is that student achievement levels are not where we would like them to be. I wouldn't say that any school district right now is happy with where student achievement is by those measures.
Right.
And so I'm struggling to understand.
We're not measuring it. We are measuring it against a target for student achievement, which is not necessarily where districts are, right? So we are setting the outcomes where the state would like them to be, not where they are now.
But that's my point. You're saying, though, that if I'm saying that every single district that I'm aware of in my region is unhappy with where their student achievement levels are, but you're saying that we're spending too much.
Yeah.
I'm trying to marry that sort of intuition of school boards and parents and districts.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I think
the
this-
outcomes of the math exercise.
Yeah, so I can get you the data on the outcomes and sort of how we're measuring those. But I think the important thing to remember here is what we are measuring. The relationship is the most efficient use of dollars, and so when there is a mismatch between the dollars that sort of what you're seeing right now, or right, and what it is we're finding, it suggests that there are structural problems in how the dollars are being spent.
Okay. And yeah, and that would go back a little bit to my question that I asked you offline, I think, which was about the cost of inputs. You said that in your analysis, the cost of inputs was not statistically significant.
Differences in the cost of input statewide is not significant, right? If we did not find evidence that there should be adjustments in the formula for the differences in input prices. That is correct.
Representative Odie?
This is an odd question, but after listening to what you just said, then if someone were to say, well, we need to increase teacher pay,
Mhm,
that's a cost input, right?
mhm.
How am I supposed to think about that when I listen to the other sense?
Well, if you want to increase teacher pay, that would necessarily increase your base, right? From the average, right? Because right now what we're considering is sort of the on average, the teacher pay statewide. And so if on average you wanted to move, for example, to a single salary schedule for the state that increased or sort of made teacher pay more consistent across the state, then we would need to, I mean, the base would need to be adjusted for the increase in sort of the average increase overall in input prices. That's correct. But that's not the case right now, right?
Okay.
Representative Brannigan.
You said that this was, that your results that you shared with us were based on the level of achievement the state wanted to get at.
Mhm.
State wanted these children to achieve at.
Mhm.
I never
correct.
knew we had a level that they want.
We do, right? So we have in our ESSA plan, we set targets for achievement that all children should be meeting on against performance targets, right? And so the performance that all states use, and when they do their school funding, is always use the statewide testing, because it's common to everybody, and those are the performance targets that are used in the existing accountability systems that are in the federal reporting. So that's right. And so we do have targets there, right?
Is that a list of goals kids have achieved at each year, or how is that set
We
up?
have we have on our statewide testing, we have benchmarks against which students are expected to perform. Yes.
Is it a hassle to send us that?
I think you can ask the AOE for those benchmarks, but I can certainly follow up with them on that.
I think Representative Rebecca has just.
It's on the website also. It's on the AOE website. I can send a link out.
So I think we're okay, Tammy. You don't have to send it to us. We
Okay,
have-
okay. Just because I'm having a little hard time hearing Representative Holcomb, I know this is an area that you know a lot about. Are these some questions? I'm also going to have to jump off. I think perhaps Representative
think
Holcomb
this is-
has some expertise in this and can help
I'll send
the
it to you.
conversation a little bit, just because I'm going to be going offline.
Yeah, I think
Would you
we
mind
got
doing
it.
that, Representative Holcomb? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm happy to do it.
Got it covered.
Okay.
Are they boarding? Are they boarding right now? Are they calling?
No, I
in?
have a few minutes. I just,
Okay.
Any more questions? Thank you very much, Professor Colby.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
dipping in.
May I just say one other thing on the outcomes though, is, whenever you do this, right? Even the evidence-based model is using assumptions about student outcomes too, right? And they're using outcomes that are related to proficiency standards as well, in terms of the amounts and types of resources that should be in schools to hit those performance targets too. And all states use those performance targets because, again, those are in the accountability framework that are used, and they're specific and measurable and consistently measured across students statewide. So it's not, I mean, this is sort of a norm. And now I understand that may not have been something that was clearly discussed when sort of the other presentations on the evidence-based model, but that is the underlying assumption that they're using there as well, right? Is that we're trying to move students to certain performance standards,
It's very helpful.
if that's helpful.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Nope.
That's
No.
it? I wrote
Yeah,
a
that's it.
17-page memo? It was that clear? Yes.
Good job.
No, I think we could spend weeks, honestly, asking questions. The issue is we know you have 2 minutes and we
No, I
have,
have 36 minutes,
And
so
we have
I'm
2
happy more,
days,
but.
but we have 2 days before we
Yeah,
need to vote. So
I understand. So, okay, great. Let me know if you have anything else. Happy to help.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Dr. Colby.
Yeah, bye-bye.
All right, Mr. Chair, we're back. During our previously scheduled program.
Okay, so before lunch, we were discussing whether or not we wanted to switch to a foundation grant funding, education funding system.
And if we have other things to move ahead on and then come back and see if we do a straw poll after this and come to a decision on it, if we go back through the entire bill and straw poll each section. Does that, Madam Chair, is that with your line of thinking?
That makes sense to me. We still have some outstanding smaller decision points related to the foundation formula, like the spending over the.
Yes, supplemental
Special
district
spending.
spending, I think you intended to say.
Indeed, thank you. So maybe we could go through that part and figure out some of those smaller decisions, like whether we'll do 10% cap and stuff like that.
And we still have to, Kirby's got some language for us.
He does, indeed.
Yes. And then we
So-
would go to Kirby's language after we make all these smaller decisions on the foundation.
Okay. Right.
Sorry about that. That's it.
Uh, Good afternoon, John Gray, Ledge Council. I don't know if you guys invited me to the table. I think I just walked over, but I.
John, you can see, Minister.
That you were interested. That's pretty legible, I think. I did want to call out, I am, just so you guys understand, when you see the header, this is draft 2.1. I was doing 1.1 this morning. There was something that was deemed not ready for prime time. It's not something that we've talked about yet, so I pulled it out. That's the sole change between 1.1 and 2.1. So nothing to really speak to there, but if you're confused as to why you see 2.1, that's why. So we left off at section 38. And a lot of this is going to be language that you've already seen. So hopefully we can go pretty quickly and then I can slow down when we get to the actual substance of the supplemental district spending. So section 38 is updates to the ed fund to ensure that it captures the revenue of that supplemental district spending tax. We've talked about this before. So those funds would go up to the ed fund. This struck language we've talked about before. This is removing the payments for the PTC, which is proposed to be repealed. So that's language that you guys have seen before. Same for section 39. This is just removal of archaic language related to the creation and purpose of the stabilization reserve. So I'm going to flip quickly through that. Very similar for section 40. There are no updates here, but just to call out what the section is, this spells out your payments of the EOP and your supplemental district spending as they become due to school districts.
John,
Yes.
I missed it. On my screen is, you got it highlighted in yellow. Line 17.
Yes. So do you have draft 1.1 up?
Yes.
So exactly. So I over lunch was asked to make an update, a small update that pulled out something we had not spoken to. And so this is draft 2.1, which is posted. It's posted on the committee page. So I can pause if folks want to pull that up on their screens and.
Thank you.
Are people pausing? People all right? Are you ready to go again? Oh, good.
Gotta get to the right page now. Page 77, is that where you're?
Yeah, 78. We're at 78 now. Folks, okay? All right. So we were just talking about section 40. This is not new language. It's just spelling out the payment of the EOP and supplemental district spending to school districts and maintains current language to call out. These are each of the payments made to school districts. So special education under chapter 101, CTE under Chapter 37 and other aid and categorical grants paid for supportive education. So we would pick up, for instance, the grants that we talked about related to small schools and sparsity. We've talked before about the language that you see struck here. This is the removal of archaic language related to high spending. It's not applicable in this new concept, so nothing new here. This section 41 is something that we have talked about but not had language for. This is just spelling out the actual vote. You may recall that in the prior draft, we talked about that a vote would occur, but I think the reference was just to the definition section of the approved spending. And this is amending the actual section that spells out the ballot that's provided for that vote. And so I'll scroll down to show you guys what would be included in the vote, which is for the supplemental district spending. So information will be provided, including, and we're on page 81, any proposed budget shall show. And on line 13, the statewide education tax rate as adjusted for each tax classification, the definition of supplemental district spending, the long-term membership of the school district, and the district's per pupil supplemental district spending in the proposed budget, and the supplemental district spending yield. Why that language is included is that those are the things from which you could determine what your rate is going to be for a particular approved spending. So that's information provided in the budget, and then you can see the actual ballot, proposed ballot language on page 82.
So, Mr. Chair, so my understanding, again, I'm looking at this when it talks about statewide education tax rate as adjusted for each classification. From my understanding is then there's still gonna be from Kirby, the classification part of the bill included.
Construct is, it's a much different version than what you saw yesterday, so we'll get to that when we get to.
Okay, well, I just need to,
Yeah.
the thing is, it gets darn confusing
Yeah,
when I haven't seen that yet.
yeah.
Okay, I was told yesterday that there's two other sections that are gonna be in here. I don't see them in here. And now we're talking about a section coming forward eventually. So I just should appreciate knowing that it's coming forward.
Sorry, yes, you're right. It is coming. Yeah.
And just to orient, because those sections were overhauled substantially overnight, the version that we have here just contains the education provisions from Beth, and then my pieces related to the education funding system, some of which assume, like for instance, what you're referencing here, that those tax classifications exist, but Kirby will have the language for the property classification.
Okay, thank you.
So a note to the chair, we may want to hold on this particular straw poll until we hear from Kirby.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're gonna hear the whole thing.
Yeah, I think we just want to make the smaller decisions that are in here. There's still a few outstanding pieces here that we haven't separate from the straw poll.
Exactly. And to the extent that you reject or approve of pieces that Kirby works on, I can easily make conforming changes in these sections to pick that up. So the budget.
Oh, you just went off screen. Oh,
Coming
we're
back.
back. Never mind.
Kirby there.
Right there.
On page 82, just to show you guys what that proposed budget could look like. You'll see in the quoted language starting on line 6, shall the voters of the school district approve the school board to expend a particular dollar figure, which is the amount that the school board has determined to be necessary in excess of the school district's educational opportunity payments. So this is the voted amount above that EOP. And then the district estimates that this proposed budget, if approved, will result in per pupil supplemental district spending of whatever it might be, and then clarify how much higher or lower in percentage than the per pupil supplemental district spending was for the current year. And then it'll actually say, and a supplemental district spending tax rate of, and would specify the rate that would be required for that particular budget. So you would have in the proposed budget language the actual effects on your tax rate. In section 42, we see a set of repeals. We've talked about the first two before, so I'm not going to belabor those, but the third piece here, at the top of page 83, you're going to see highlighted subsection C. This is repeal of the census grant for special education to tie into when you bring in those special education weights. So now you're providing those dollars through the weighting system. They're going to be built into the EOP that school districts receive. So you can pull back that census grant. This does not disrupt the extraordinary expenditures provisions of the same chapter, just to call that out.
That has a separate effective date, yes?
So all of these sections would come into effect at these are tied to whenever it's settled for the foundation formula to come online. This would come online at the same time. The current draft language is July 1, 2027, but my understanding from discussions over lunch is some of that is still in flux.
Was that a stone what?
Some of that is still in flux. I think there's still discussion of what the timeline is.
Representative Holcomb.
Thank you very much. This, just to pin this is something we need to come back when we get that special education study, because the weight may yield money above the reimbursable amount. So we will need to revisit how we fund extraordinary expenses when we get that information back. So
Yeah.
not to change anything here,
Yeah.
but we have to pin that for next year.
On page 83 of section 43, which is your supplemental district spending reserve, there aren't changes to this section, but just to orient the group to the concept, this is if you're committed to that supplemental district spending, your dollars flow up. And you'll recall that we've removed the penalty for a district that is greater than the lowest taxing capacity district. Through equalization, you would raise funds above what you voted. And so that extra money would remain in this reserve within the ed fund. And it could be used, as you see in subsection B, to cover payments, to offset any deficits. So if there's mathematical errors, and then flow into the school construction aid special fund after that year.
Representative Burkhart.
Why does it still say penalty? Section A.
That is the reference to any amounts that are above the voted amount. So if you're in a district that has, that's just the defined terms that's used to reference, if you're in a non-lowest taxing capacity district, any extra funding above what you voted is the penalty that's reserved here. You could easily call it something else if you would like to change those.
Change it to recapture just for shits and giggles.
Yeah.
Excuse me, a better term might be recapture.
For your entertainment.
Okay.
Isn't it the extra amount simply due to the equalization
Yes.
action?
Yes.
Come up with a shorter name then?
I don't like the word penalty like Bridget. I think that's very confusing.
Yeah.
It's solely due to the fact that we did an equalization.
Yep. You want this
I
to
don't know
just
what you
be
wanna
literally any recapture? It could be
I
something
call it
else.
recapture. but
Yeah,
it is.
yes.
What that means.
That works?
Yeah.
On page 84, section 44 is tasking the Agency of Education on or before December 15th of this year to submit a report to you guys, education committees, on clear and equitable guidelines for minimum transportation to be provided and covered by the Transportation Reimbursement Grant as part of this education transformation system. So getting an update on recommendations for how to address transportation. And you're going to see, obviously, we have several sections, and Beth walked through some of these this morning, where there are things that remain to be resolved, right, over this multi-year process. And so getting reporting on the provisions still need further working out. For section 45, you're seeing a similar report back, but this is for JFO on or before December 15th of this year to submit a report to you guys, education, that analyzes the implicit price deflator that's currently used in the draft and alternative inflationary measures that may be applied, to analyze options and provide considerations for selecting an inflationary measure appropriate to Vermont's education funding system. And this could, you'll recall that when we were talking earlier about, there's a section that involves recalibration of the base, and it called out specifically that there might be adjustments made to the inflationary measure. This report could inform that choice at the time that you receive this information. And I will also just foreshadow, when we come to the homestead exemption section, I have pulled in an inflator for that section. It strikes me that the inflator I pulled in, which is consistent with all the other inflators in the bills, may be much less appropriate in the homestead exemption context. It's just a placeholder. So this report on appropriate measures would be helpful for updating any inflators. Separately, on or before December 15th, JFO also to submit a report, same committees on the current funding system for pre-K education, the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, or any other early care and learning systems. The report to review financial incentives in these existing early care and learning systems, and to provide considerations for changing the funding streams associated with these to align with the education transformation initiatives envisioned in this area.
Representative Holcomb.
Thank you. Can you explain what the financial incentives, what is that a reference to?
I will say I did not draft this particular provision. If when Beth comes back into the room, we could potentially address this. I can't speak to pre-K, unfortunately.
I imagine Julia could if she's there.
Julia.
Julia Rector, Joint Fiscal Office. This was language put in, we worked with JFO worked with Ledge Council on this language to try to account for the fact that during the course of the report, we may identify certain incentives or interactions between the different programs. So the flexibility of this language would allow us to include those findings in our report.
And is it, may I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Is it just looking at how we fund, or is it also looking at how we deliver and how that relates to the funding or the cost?
Do you mean the delivery system, or do you mean the way that dollars are presented in different delivery models?
Well, for example, the evidence-based model assumes that all care for all 3 to 5-year-olds, full day is provided within existing schools. That's not what we do. Are we evaluating that in the context of this report, or just looking at how we fund these systems?
I don't know. Full disclosure, I am probably not gonna be the point person working on this report in JFO, so I was not.
If I could jump in, I would say yes, that's exactly what Emily Byrne will be looking at.
What?
That we have a disconnect between the way pre-K that's done in-house is funded and the way pre-K that happens out of school buildings is funded. And how there are various, I think there was, and I think the word incentives was a nod towards the, the expression perverse incentives, which is a technical term that doesn't sound very good in regular life. And so what she will be looking at is exactly the interaction between those things and how we could perhaps make it make more sense and save the education fund some money.
So the Education Transformation Initiative, one of the goals is scale. So we might be looking at how we create scale in pre-kindergarten.
Exactly. And this will give us the data that we need to do that.
So now we're jumping into the actual education property tax rate formula, and we're going to come to the supplemental district spending. So section 46 is amending the definitions in Title 32. We have talked about these definitions before, so I would skip down to where they first appear. You look on page 87. Your definition of supplemental district spending. This is the spending that a school district approves in excess of its EOP for the fiscal year, provided that no school district, we do have added language to carve out interstate school districts from this proposed cap. So provided that no school district shall approve spending in excess of 10% of the school district's EOP for the fiscal year. What I recall from our discussions either yesterday or the day prior was that folks might have some appetite for the cap, but they hadn't, I don't think you guys had talked about the particular figure, but just to remind the group. But your district's, the supplemental district spending is what you vote above your EOP, is what it is. And here we include a concept for a cap.
So there's just, I see some confusion in the room about if you're looking at the printed version on page 87, the highlighted section of number 18 and draft 1.1 is no longer in this draft as it was deemed it was not ready for prime time.
Offsetting fund.
Yes.
I hadn't really had an opportunity to take much testimony on that, and at this point, we're kind of late in the game and can invent a new play. Carry the metaphor.
Folks still comfortable with the definition of supplemental district spending? You understand the concept there? On page 88, we just talked about updating this subdivision 20 to be recapture. This is the amount of revenue raised through imposition of that supplemental district spending tax that is in excess of the actual voted amount, the supplemental district spending. So we'll change that to be recapture. And this is what goes to that reserve. 21, we've talked about the supplemental district spending yield, which is a way of calculating your spending, your tax rate. In this case, what you see highlighted is we moved from a penalty, which was the 80 cents, to $1. So this no longer incorporates a penalty. It just asks, what could the lowest taxing capacity district raise at 1%, basically?
People still okay with that? I mean, that's what we discussed. No penalty.
Can I back up just a minute? I'm a little bit slow, but again, when we're talking about, I'm on page 87 again, line 18. That's 10%. And I think I heard you say that we haven't talked about that or made a concrete decision on that yet. Is that?
I didn't hear the group express a view as to the particular cap.
Right, that is one of the decisions we have to make.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. Good pointing it out. Yeah, because we had discussed, remember, JFO presented potential caps of 5, 10, and 20%. And there was reluctance to name what a cap would be because we weren't sure what the base would be and what the compensation was. So we expressed some leeriness about that as to how much would we think would be necessary for different school districts. But now we have a number of 10% in here. Is it the right number? Do you want to change that? And again, this can be changed. Yeah.
Good, thanks.
Is everybody okay with 10% for now? Sure.
When will we get modeling to see, for example, if you had the map set up the way it is now? With Chittenden East, Chittenden West, and Addison, the way they are now. Is 10% going to allow them to make SDS spending of 10% or less, allow them to spend what they're spending today? It's my
I think we could do some like quick back of the envelope math on that one. I don't think we need to.
And back of the envelope, yeah, I think it would, if we did 10%, 5, maybe not, but 10 would.
So if you're saying maybe if we did 10%, then maybe it shouldn't be capped at 10%, because why would we want to do that to those schools right off the bat? Those districts right off the bat, limit them to 10. If 5 isn't enough and 10 probably is okay.
So we need to limit it to something for Brigham, if not just plain old equity. More than 10 might make sense. Can someone remind me what the excess spending is? Is it 12?
18.
18? Do folks want to set it there? Because that's a number that's sort of consistent with some of our existing thinking on this.
Okay.
Really high.
Representative Holden.
I think this might be a case where I want to go look at timeline again, and I think the volatility is larger, correct me if I'm wrong, Julia, but the smaller the districts. And so the bigger, if we are doing this in a bigger district construct, there will be less volatility. So a lower threshold might be appropriate, just enough. I mean, I would ask the financial whiz, but that would be my sense.
Representative Burkhardt.
Yeah, but this is 12 districts. So basically, I think what we've been talking about is somewhere more than 5. So we're probably closer with 12. I don't know. I think the discussion the other day was if we set it, I know I'm contradicting myself. But the other day when we were talking about it, one of the concerns about setting it too high was then we're getting really close to the same volatility, unpredictability for taxpayers about what their bills are going to look like. If we limit it to somewhere around 5 or 10%, that's still, it's not perfect predictability, but it's a little closer to knowing what your tax outside possibility might be for the upcoming year. And I take Representative Holcomb's point that we're several years out from where this will be. So this could look very different. And I, over lunch was thinking about it, some of these Chittenden County and Addison County districts already made pretty big cuts for FY '26. And it would be interesting to look at where they are now, having made cuts and under the pressure to make cuts under Act 127, whether by the time we get out to where a foundation formula is implemented, if we are closer to that foundation formula, having made those cuts already by the time we're getting. Yeah, I would be surprised. I would feel a little comfortable with 18% because I feel like that does take a lot of pressure off of us to set the base at the right level. And it still allows for a lot of unpredictability in tax bills. I would feel comfortable at 10%. I think 5% is almost too small to like really make a measurable difference, but like 10% allows you, like, if you have an unexpected maintenance issue, or if healthcare goes up again next year and we don't keep up with it, the following year as quickly as we should, because we're resetting the base only every 5 years, it allows us a little bit of room to sort of keep up.
Motion for 10%. Go ahead, sir.
So
I was
10%.
just wondering about, what if your healthcare goes up and you have a catastrophic event?
We haven't talked about healthcare yet.
What's that?
Maybe we should talk about healthcare before we talk about 10%.
So I think I think that's a really good point, and we're looking at inflators very specifically over the summer to make sure we have one that's resilient to healthcare costs, or responsive, or whatever the right word is, responsive to healthcare costs. Catastrophic event might be the kind of thing where the state would need to step in any case, absolutely, whether that's a catastrophic federal funding event or whatever else. I wonder. I don't want to downplay the importance of the decisions we're making here. They're really important decisions, and they're setting us on a really important path. And I want to make sure the committee understands that we're going to have to do this entire thing again next year, regardless of what we decide right now.
Appreciate you saying that.
And so we're going to start next session going through this entire bill as passed and seeing what we missed and seeing what our next steps are and hearing the reports that we brought in. And we're all going to have work over the summer to make sure that the missing pieces have the background work done to start off this next year. And so the 10% is a few years out, and we can make sure that we're insulating to make sure that 10% works.
Who's making the motion?
I know that we go with 10%, as following the chair's input that it's not permanent and it's sufficient, but not too much.
So then are we extrapolating that at 10% cap on supplemental district spending above the educational opportunity payment? Or are we
Just on,
extrapolating that with the understanding that it will be
I think
reviewed
our-
again in 2026?
ooh, no, I think it's just in the language as to what number to use.
Right.
And I'm thinking without any of the other stuff, it's just as it's currently written, just to go with 10%. Without the other stuff.
Okay. Mr. Clerk, ready?
I am ready for a straw poll. So is everyone, are you going to call everyone in favor?
Right. All in favor, raise your hand.
You're gonna have.
Opposed? 10-1.
Who's, so, oh, you're opposed?
Just look this way every time.
I'm confused. I'm surprised by this one though, because I would assume that you would want some kind of cap. Are you saying the cap is too
No,
high?
I want a cap, definitely.
Yeah,
But again, with the base amount going up 14%,
okay,
right?
okay,
And you just talked about healthcare. I don't think that should be in a supplemental payment.
yeah.
You know,
It shouldn't be. I think the concern is
It went
that,
up over a hypothetical.
Right.
The
Yeah.
12,000 has nothing to do with what we're currently doing.
so anyway, so it was 10-0-1 was our straw poll.
10-0. No, 10-1-0.
10-1-0, sorry, 10-1-0. 10-1-0 straw poll on the 10%. Thank you for the clarification. Okay.
Okay. I think we are on line 10 of page 88. Subdivision 22, per pupil supplemental district spending. We've talked about this before, but it's an intuitive concept. It's your per pupil amount that you get from dividing your supplemental district spending by long-term membership. School district with the lowest taxing capacity, it's the school district other than an interstate school district. This is to avoid the potential impact of having a quite small district end up being your lowest taxing capacity district, which could have effects on everyone else in terms of the equalization. So the school district anticipated to have the lowest aggregate equalized education property tax grand list per long-term membership in the following fiscal year.
I feel like since I represent a interstate district, I just need to say, we're not looking for special carve-outs here. It's that we have not figured out potential constitutional issues. This may change when we have resolved those constitutional issues. And also, it is not in anybody's interest to be tied to interstates if they're still very small, because that would hurt you too. So just wanted to say that's there as a placeholder.
Page 89, section 47, we're talking about the imposition of the statewide education tax. And we'll come later in section F to imposition of that supplemental district spending tax. So we've walked through these sections where this is casting with a rate sufficient to raise the EOP after accounting for forecasted available revenues that would be set yearly by you guys and adjusted for homestead property in each general class of non-homestead property. According to the chart set out below on page 90, you're going to see a condensed chart. This is presuming things outside of the draft here, but as you'll see later today with the classification updates, this is a more simplified version contemplated of the classification system. So that's what you see highlighted at the top of page 90. Homestead, non-homestead apartment, homestead, non-residential, and non-homestead residential.
And Kirby will be speaking to that.
Exactly. This is not I would make conforming changes here to whatever happens with those pieces. This is just showing you that it appears in the imposition of the statewide education tax because that has to be adjusted for whatever classifications are introduced.
Sorry, the Kirby language.
Kirby language.
Is that in this bill somewhere now, or is it gonna get added in?
It is in here now.
Kirby's saying it's not in here.
Kirby's saying it's not in here now.
Kirby Keen, legislative counsel. I have 3 things to show you. 2 of them, one has to do with appraisals, the other has to do with classifications. Those 2 pieces. They were written overnight and for frequency say, I did not try to cram those in this morning.
Yeah, just checking.
But the parts of it that related to John's work, John has there, right? So I won't be showing you that later, but now see what that's going to look like in the tax rate class or calculation section of law. I'll be showing you the rest of it. The third thing I have to show you is just the miscellaneous provisions that came out of H 135 and other things that are related to this. So there's your preview of what I'll be talking about.
Thank you.
And just to call out why the ones are there, you see the 1 as each factor. We don't yet have factors for these. So this is using 1 ensures that you don't have to analyze the distinctions between these, but these would be updated at the point that you settle on particular factors. I don't think we need to trouble with this particular subsection. This is just explaining.
And just to be clear, I don't plan on attempting to make decisions about those ratios this year or next year. It's setting up a structure so that we have the data to maybe make a decision about that in the future.
So conforming changes throughout this section to pick up the statewide education tax that we've talked about. We've walked through these sections before. I'm going to go quickly through these if you guys are comfortable with that. Know that this is a lot of information, and if you don't want me to do that, I can slow down. I'm just trying to be sensitive to how much we have to cover. So I would jump down to I will just on page 92, I'll hit again because this is something that we have talked about, but just to say again, we switched from having the Secretary of Education determine those education tax payments. We now have the Commissioner of Taxes. The sense I got from the group was there was comfort with that, but just to call out that is something that's included here. The next piece is really subsection F. So let me jump down to page 94. This is the imposition of that supplemental district spending tax. None of this language is new, but I'll walk through this because it is tied into this core concept. It's imposed on all homestead and non-homestead property for school districts that approve spending pursuant to a budget presented to the voters. We saw that ballot language earlier, the proposed way that that budget would be presented. The Commissioner of Taxes to determine the supplemental district spending tax rate by dividing that school district's per pupil supplemental district spending by the supplemental district spending yield. So that's how you determine that rate. And that's why those pieces of information were proposed to be included in the budget that goes out to voters so they can see what rate is going to come into effect. Technical provision of the legislative body to bill each property taxpayer at that rate, applying the CLA. And just the provisions you see at the bottom of the page, this is ensuring that this tax is assessed and collected in the same way that other taxes are assessed and collected. I'm going to jump down to, let's see, page 96.
Just a question for you. In terms of each municipality may retain 0.225 of 1% of the total supplemental district spending tax collected. So that's the same as the property tax, education property.
Exactly. That's really helpful. I should have said that. So the technical provisions, I keep calling these as technical provisions that you see included here are mirrored on based on what's currently done for the statewide education property tax. So just using the same technical provisions for the supplemental district spending tax. On page 96, we're talking about the December 1 letter. Just to walk through this again, it's going to set out the Commissioner of Taxes will calculate and recommend the statewide education property tax rate. And as you'll recall, that's just meant to generate what's raised for the EOP. So we know that from the base amount multiplied by the weighted long-term membership. So that's why that can be recommended. The letter would also set out the supplemental district spending yield, which you'll recall the way that we determined that was by identifying that lowest taxing capacity district and then asking what they could raise at a particular tax rate. And both of those could be provided in your December 1 letter. The information that would be included along with the recommendations, and this is on page 97, would include the base amount for each school district, the estimated long-term membership, weighted long-term membership, and the aggregate equalized education property tax grand list of its members. The estimated aggregate equalized education property tax grand list of its municipal members per long-term membership. And the reason you care about that is that's what allows you to identify your lowest taxing capacity district. Would include the estimated school district with that lowest taxing capacity and would provide the range of per pupil supplemental district spending between all districts in the state the previous year. On page 98, you're just seeing conforming revisions. So these are flow through changes that happen if you accept this proposal to use the supplemental district spending tax.
We have a question from Representative Wazazak.
Just jumping back to the December 1st
Yeah.
letter,
Teddy.
Representative Teddy. Friday afternoon, trying to read legalese brain. In the December 1st letter, will there be information about what each district could raise through supplemental district? Is that what that's saying when it's talking about the yield?
The yield just tells you what that lowest taxing capacity district could raise. This would not tell you, I mean, you could probably figure out from the other information provided. It doesn't identify.
It's not explicit, yeah, but it, okay, yep. Easy enough to figure out.
And the December 1 letter wouldn't be able to tell you that because, well, unless we change what the base is for the supplemental district spending, because we're saying that would be a percentage of your educational opportunity payment. And so you would need to do your whole school budget, which wouldn't be done by December 1
Okay.
to estimate like what that payment would be.
I think I'm not.
Should let Julia
You don't
speak to me.
My understanding is that we're on a year lag on between this information and the budget.
Okay.
Is that right, John?
Yes. And I think I was not following the question as to what do you think can't be determined?
I got confused, and as I started to say it, I realized I was wrong. No, because I was thinking to myself, like, if the district doesn't know what its budget is, and I'm still thinking in old budget terms, then you can't figure out what the supplemental is. But if you know, you can know what your payment is based on the December 1 letter, and so you certainly can determine what the maximum amount would be. So yes, I
Okay.
would figure yes.
Because all that you need to know is the yield and then you can determine what.
So it's not explicitly called out, the information provided will allow. Okay.
Yes, yes.
And the proposed budget would include the yield, would include that information and would spell out what the rate would be calculated when you divide your supplemental district spending, if approved, by that yield. So on page 98, it's in conforming revisions. So just pulling out some terms we no longer need to reference. These have been walked through before and just flow through from the other changes. We're switching gears now on page 99, so I don't know if it's appropriate for me to pause, but I'm happy to keep going on with the PTC repeal and the homestead exemption. This will all be familiar to you. So hopefully nothing novel here. And I think we can flip pretty quickly through this unless folks have appetite to stick with particular sections.
Sure.
Go ahead, Sean.
Cool. So section 51, this is your statutory purposes. This is calling out what the purpose of the proposed homestead property tax exemption is. So reducing that property tax liability for Vermont households with low and moderate household income. On page 100, we see the actual start of a large section 52, which is amending the existing homestead property tax credit and renter credit chapter. And this is now becoming the homestead property tax exemption, municipal property tax credit, and renter credit chapter. We've walked through this language before, so I'm going to flip relatively quickly, and I will come down to the actual staircase, which is, I think, where folks are going to have the most appetite to take a look.
But it was raised to me by somebody in the building about whether or not the municipal property tax credit still remains in place.
It does.
Yes,
It does.
just want to make sure that's still the case. Yeah.
So yeah, just to orient, what this does is this repeals the statewide property tax credit. It pulls away that statewide circuit breaker, but retains the municipal provisions in the chapter. So it has the municipal circuit breaker, it has the municipal property tax credit, and then in place of that repealed property tax credit, you now have a proposed homestead exemption. That's what this chapter does as a whole. So we can jump down to find the actual numbers. I think we can jump to, yes, section 6066, which is on page 104. Your computation of homestead property tax exemption, municipal property tax credit, and renter credit. The struck language that you see is removing the existing PTC. And then you see on page 106, the language is highlighted for our drafting operations team to review this section, but you have seen this language before. So it's the same income brackets, proposed exemptions that you've seen in Julia's slides before numerous times. But just to call these out, these are in steps. For those less than 25,000, exemption 5% of the claimant's house site value. Between 25 and 47,000, 90% of the claimant's house site value. Between 47 and 50 and 80% house site value. And I know that there's been some discussion around that 3% gap. A smaller income bracket than the others.
Why is that? I feel like we were told this, and I'm just not remembering in this moment. Why does that bracket exist?
I don't know. I don't know why that was the selected.
It's a policy choice that does not make sense to me. Why those $3,000 of income?
Step down in June.
No, so the structure of the house, the homestead exemption, could be literally anything. So the household groups that you decide, income groups that you decide to put into statute and the house site groups that you decide to put into statute are all policy choices. This is the structure that we have been looking at over the last several or couple of weeks. I have not received specific guidance to adjust that household income group, which is why I have not presented bracket, which is why I've not presented modeling showing a different structure, because there's not been a different structure requested.
Representative Brannigan.
Vice Chair, is a motion in order then to change this from 22 25,000 to 49,000 and then start the new bracket at 50, not have that $3,000 step. Is that in order?
What if you make 49.5?
So
You know, I mean,
That's fine too.
there's a dead area.
Yeah, like,
Whatever.
she's, Kara's
Oh, sorry.
almost speaking.
I think the 47 is about matching up with some existing law around the circuit breaker. Um, and so if we're gonna change that,
Like break other stuff.
and move one of, move part of that into another part, then we would need to change that. There would be a question about that step. So if would it move from 90 to 7? Would it move from 90 to 80? It's certainly weird, I get that, but it was designed to match up with the existing 47
Okay, that's a good reason to leave it where it is.
and and still have a stepped system that's not moving too fast and doesn't have too many cliffs.
Representative Burkhardt.
But then 50 is kind of a random choice to have 50 so close to the 47. Like I understood where the 47 came from and where the 90 came from, because those are existing statute. But then how we break up all the stuff in the middle is totally, as Julia would say, a policy choice. Like we could choose any numbers that we wanted to put in there. It does just seem odd that we have one bracket that's $3,000 and another one that's 10,000. Like why would we? I understand there are implications on how much the program costs if we were to change that 50 to 55 or 60, if we were to play with these now. But it does just seem really strange to leave 3,000 and there's a whole bracket.
Well, and I would offer not just strange or odd, but also inequitable. That,
Yeah.
in terms of ability to pay, there's not much of a difference between 49,000 and 51,000.
So then I think the question is, does the whole, if it becomes 47 to 60, does that all become 80%?
Yeah.
And if that happens, then does the 60 to 70 become 70%?
It changes the whole waterfall. I hear what you're saying, and then it does change the cost because.
I'm
then
not
you're
even
saying-
trying to make a point. I'm like genuinely asking that question.
You're right, it does. Any change that we do in the numbers is gonna change what our estimates are on the cost. On the tax credit. You make it up to 60, then seems logical mathematically, but then it's like, ooh, it just cost $1 million.
Yeah.
I think.
And Representative Holcomb and I are here whispering to each other. It just seems that this is continuing a broken way to pay for education when we're looking at artificially inflated house site values because of a once in a lifetime pandemic, rather than just focusing on income and ability to pay and wealth that folks are sitting on. And I know we're still going through this language and I don't want to jump ahead to the policy discussion, but it's also the question that's been raised about someone who was living in Manhattan, sold their condo for a buttload of money. Already, so they have no income, but they're living in $1 million house, and now they're going to be able to exempt 90% of that house site value for purposes of taxes, which just exacerbates the lower amount that the wealthiest households are paying into the education fund that we heard from public assets earlier this week. And I understand that this is all a work in progress that we will continue to work on over the next 4 years, but.
Welcome to the legislature.
So we have a choice to make, either to leave it as it is or change the numbers. How do people feel? We want to leave it as it is, do you want to change the numbers?
Leave it. I mean, we've seen the graph already as to how it worked out.
What the cost is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think.
We've been given a lot more information than what we had when I made that motion, so I think we should just leave it at the.
All right. Or nobody's really strenuously objecting.
I would just say, I'm concerned that we're treating symptoms, we're still not treating the cause. And I seriously worry about the impact working Vermonters and Vermonters who are just about the threshold to be eligible for this, who will have to pick, along with others, the cost, but may not have the means. And we've been hearing a lot in my area from people who are in that income bracket and who are really worried about their ability to stay here. And I know we can't treat a spending problem with a funding formula, but maybe we need a simpler system. I mean, again, I was a huge skeptic on the income-based formula for education, that Brighton talked to me and sort of moved me a little bit, but I worry that we're treating a system here, but we may be causing hardship for some other people as well.
Well,
Focus.
I think perhaps the question for you, Rebecca Holman, is, are we moving, do you object to a homestead exemption as opposed to the property tax credit we have
No,
now?
I think this is
You want
clear.
something totally different?
No, I think if we're gonna do an exemption, if we're gonna do something, I think what we're doing is clear and easier to understand than what we would have been doing. Like, so I think if you frame the question that way, yeah, it's clear, it's easier to understand, easier to explain. I'm putting a pin in there that we have no work to do.
In the background in terms of looking at a totally different.
Yeah. Yes.
Good discussion. It's a tepid, okay, let's move on.
Well, do you guys want me to continue with the figures? I think I've identified the only ones that folks had observed as kind of wonky. So I can hit the other figures if you're interested, but this is material you've seen many, many times.
Okay.
So, and just to call out where this ends, for a claimant whose household income is greater than 150,000, no amount of house site value is exempt under this. That's where you top out. The remaining provisions are, that's kind of the substance of the proposal for like thinking about this concept. The remainders of these pieces, we have walked through the technicalities of how this works. So I'm happy to pause on pieces, but again, I'm sort of trying to keep, there's still a lot of other big stuff to come. What you're seeing here on page 108, while we've retained the municipal circuit breaker, what you see below is the removal of that statewide circuit breaker. And you can see on 109, you can't receive an exemption that reduces the house site value below 0. The new language that you see highlighted on page 109, subdivision 4, starting on line 8. This is just applying an inflator to each of those dollar figures, so including both the income brackets and the house site value. And this is what I called out earlier as an odd fit in terms of the inflator that's applied here. So this is to be adjusted for inflation annually on or before November 15th by the Commissioner of Taxes. And this uses that NYPA implicit price deflator, which I don't think, I'm guessing, is likely not as suited to the homestead exemption. The inflators applied to income brackets and house site value, as it might be in applying it to the education system. So this would be one where when you get the report back on inflationary measures, this would be a natural place to come back and say, we have a different one for this particular piece.
So we don't end up in the same situation with income brackets that are locked in for almost 30 years.
Precisely. If you're comfortable, I'm just going to scroll until I see something more substantive. We've talked about, just to overview like things I'm skipping over and why I'm skipping over. On page 111, we have provisions for how do you deal with a co-op member, and we can allocate particular property taxes. So we've talked about this in the past, but that's the kind of thing that you're seeing me scroll past here. I think a lot of the remaining sections of this chapter are conforming changes that flow through from the proposal that we just walked through and we have talked about before. So if folks have independent questions on these sections, email me and I can talk to you about these pieces. So I would propose we can jump all the way to the bottom of page 120. This is section 53. And this is tasking the Department of Taxes on or before January 15th, 2026, with providing to you guys in the Senate Committee on Finance suggestions for updating the homestead declaration to address the implementation of this homestead exemption. And that can be provided in a sample form, and then I could update the legislative language to capture that information contained in that form.
Question for the chair, if you're okay with that being January 15th?
Thank you. Yes, it would be lovely if it was December 15th, 2025.
For the record, I also completely agree with getting more stuff in December. I'm not.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Just sucking up.
And again, there are two reasons to do this. One, we will actually pay more attention to it if it arrives on December 15th and be able to incorporate it into our work for the new year. And two, it means that people who work at state agencies and our own staff aren't stuck with a deadline that's right after Christmas holiday and working through Christmas.
Sounds good. On page 121, you're seeing conforming revisions for that PTC repeal. And then I think we can jump to page 122. So this set of sections is trying to get at that state where you're considering a transition from that cost factor foundation formula to an evidence-based approach. So what you see in section 57 is amending the tasking for the Education Fund Advisory Committee to assist with the transformation of Vermont's education finance system. And then down on page 123, we've added as new recommendations national best practices for addressing the intra-school district effects of foundation formula, including through the use of weighting factors, and whether to transition from that cost-based foundation formula, as is implicit in the foundation formula that we just walked through, to an evidence-based foundation formula. So getting a recommendation on whether it's worthwhile to make that leap. Section 58, these are arbitrary figures because these are contingent dates that are set, but this is the provisions that would change if you switch from a cost factor approach to a evidence-based approach. And so what you see is an amendment to the base amount figure. Again, this would just be something that you would amend once you had settled on an approach. This is making clear that you would amend the base amount when you transition from that cost factor to evidence-based approach. And you could make this any arbitrary figure. It's just to call out that it should be addressed if you transition to an evidence-based approach, because the things that will change when you transition would be your base amount and your weights. Conceivably, there could be more pieces included, but those are the figures that are going to be picked up.
On the paragraph above, section above, we're saying whether or not the transition from a cost-based foundation to an evidence-based foundation.
Mhm.
So that's the chair. Do we need the next section?
Just to call out, these are contingently effective. So this is only if specific conditions are met do these get triggered.
Yeah.
What were you asking, Charlie?
Just wondering if because in the former paragraph it says whether to transition from a cost-based foundation formula, which is good to have it there. Do we need the next section on setting what that base amount would be?
I think so.
It basically forces the legislature to check in if you've met all the conditions on what the appropriate figures would be for an evidence-based approach.
So subdivision, section 58, subdivision 16. Figure is 10,000, that's just a placeholder.
Exactly. What it forces is for people to look at the number. That's what it does. And it's the same provisions when we get to 124. As I foreshadowed, the other change that you have to make in addition to the base amount is to your weighting factors. And so what you see here is to force everyone to look at these figures, just to change every weight to 1.0. But like I said, it's the same effect. It's just look at the numbers if you're transitioning to an evidence-based approach. And this is I mentioned earlier how difficult it was to read the weighting section with all the structural language. This is what it would look like once it is come. And you can see how wonderful. It is. It's beautiful.
It's
Uh,
so done. Lovely.
Effective dates, I can walk through this, but given that there's still some discussion, and we do have for many of the section headers, the date for which those would become effective in line, and you can scroll through the document to see those. I think it may not make sense to go through the very convoluted path of getting all the distinct effective dates for 59 different sections.
Agreed.
vaguely.
We should skip the effective dates, and when we're ready to look at effective dates, we should work off of Beth's effective date chart, not the bill language.
Representative Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, can we go back to page 120, section 53?
Yes.
Just curious, in this sample form, I think I remember us talking about the property tax exemption being, of course, taken at the time of year, not that lags. But I don't understand the process of as far as the property taxpayer is just gonna, is it gonna be through this form that they're gonna be able to take off that amount of money?
This is just for them to make a homestead declaration. So this is for them to say what I'm living on, this is a homestead, and then they could be picked up through the exemption. But this is just for the declaration itself, which is currently done. But this is just saying you're going to have updated information required to do that exemption. So let's make sure that the homestead declaration that folks are filing is reflective of the informational needs of the new homestead exemption. So it's just cleaning up the document that people are using for that declaration.
Okay, but that exemption amount that's taken off your tax bill for that year, right? I mean,
Well, what it does is it removes the house site value, which is taxed, right? It's removing what is taxed. So it's not as if something's taxed and then you're reducing the figures, it's reducing the amount to which your house site value is actually
okay.
a particular percentage.
And then we talked about that all those that are reduced that amount has to be picked up for everybody else, correct?
Yeah, we talked about how we said you pay for the others basically, but the idea is that yes, to the extent that folks aren't, because they're exempted, contributing revenues that would otherwise be there, if you need those revenues, they have to be made up elsewhere. That's basically that.
Okay, thanks.
I will stop sharing.
Representative.
Well, I was just gonna clarify. I thought Mark's question was gonna be, I think this is just a different homestead declaration form than what we currently fill out.
Mhm.
And it goes into the state and they're gonna calculate, based upon the information you give them, they're gonna calculate out what that exemption is. And then they're gonna report that to the town clerk and they're gonna apply that to your tax bill when it goes out. So the paper flow is the same.
Okay.
It's just starting with a different piece of information.
And you'll still see that amount probably on your.
On the tax bill.
Okay.
John, you walked us through it? You have.
I want to get out of this chair. Yes.
I want to get out of this one. We're going to take a 5-minute break.